Um, Today we're going to be talking about responsive content. It's a conversation. If you, anytime, just interrupt and ask a question. I'm a front-end developer. I've been thinking a lot about staying away from that speaker while I have a microphone in my hand. And thinking about responsive design from the front end, but there's some really big implications for the back end as well. And I know the theme system really well. Like at DrupalCon San Francisco, I gave a core conversation about the render API and how complex it is, and what are we really doing here. And it was a bit hand wavy because I didn't actually know what the problem was. But today we're going to be talking about mobile. It's going to tie into WYSIWYG, render API, design patterns, semantics, HTML5. I think maybe I've listed everything that actually Drupal does. But that's a fantastic slide. Oh, right, okay. So what are some awesome things that you love? Chocolate and peanut butter cups. I love them together. They're fantastic. Ponies and unicorns, ponycorns. Who doesn't love ponycorns? The same thing is true about responsive layouts and responsive content, right? They really go together quite well. And Drupal's layout system makes it really easy to do responsive layouts, right? So you've got different regions on your TPL. All you need to do is apply some CSS, basically, right? And you can have your regions sort of rearrange themselves. I think a lot of you are actually back-end developers. Is there anybody who's not familiar with this front-end concept of responsive web design? Because I could show another slide that shows what responsive web design means. Or did everybody?
I don't know the term.
You don't know responsive web design? Okay.
I understand what you're saying, but I don't know the term exactly.
Right. So let me actually show you a slide that I gave at 10:45, and make it really obvious what's going on. What I mean by responsive design. So this is a responsive website, Hicks Design, and as the size of your browser changes, and like different devices obviously have their own intrinsic width, you can see that the layout changes depending on what the width of your device is or what the width of your window is on your desktop. And this is a single source. There's no JavaScript. It's just HTML, CSS3 media queries, and some extra sort of CSS stuff. And here we're going to zoom out again. You see this is the mobile design, which is just a single column. And then as things are wider in your device, different things rearrange so they fit into the context of your device. This is what responsive design is all about. And Drupal is great about this. You can do this right now without any problems, without any changes to the back end of Drupal, which is fantastic. That's what I talked about at 10:45. Let's go back to the other slides now. So, ponycorns. Okay, there we go. Oh, that's maybe too far. That's too much back. Yeah, okay. So, another thing that's possible, and front-end developers are figuring this out, and again, we don't need back-end changes for this, but you can have like a node that has a whole bunch of fields on it with, like, for example, you can create responsive panel layouts. So basically, you have a single source panel, HTML, inside panels. You can add fields into this pane and the other fields into this pane, and have the actual content be responsive in the same way that the regions and block regions in your page TPL can be responsive. So this is something that we actually just did at Palantir.net last week, and we haven't quite launched the site. It's going to probably launch this week, and it's using responsive panel layouts to do content, and this works great with fielded nodes. Really, really great. The problem is, and I'm sorry I'm whispering, I totally killed my voice in my first session, but the problem is that there's a lot of sites that use the basic page content type. And the reason why they do this is because they have, pages that they're not repeatable, right? It's not like you have another page which has the exact same structure, right? So you can't use fields because if you created a content type just for that page, you would never use it. You'd have like one node, and you could do that. Some people do that for homepage. Yeah.
I was just thinking the way WordPress lets you add a field on just the one thing you're looking at. I've been wondering for a while whether Field API could be sort of another version of it, where you can just add a single field to one piece of one entity.
Adding fields to a single node or a single entity. Right. Right. Sure. Yeah. That might be a good solution. I don't know. But right now, basically, the basic page content type is it's a single big text field, right? That's the body field, and we always stick WYSIWYG editors on there, and maybe you have insert module or media module or whatever. So you're just dumping stuff into there, and it ends up being hard-coded HTML inside your content, right? And so how do you can basically add some hard-coded HTML to do very specific responsive designs if you want to, but it feels like Drupal should have a way to make it easier rather than hard-coding HTML into the... What happens when you redesign the site, right? So we have to redesign all of these pages. Kind of stinks, right? So one idea that I had was, how many different slides have I got here? Bringing up 100%. Oh, I totally skipped a slide here. How did I do that? Yeah, that's why. Sorry. Okay. Let's bring it back to Render API. So I'm both frustrated by Render API and I love it, right? Because Drupal 7 is super powerful. I can do crazy things because I'm probably one of the few people who knows the whole system inside and out, right? Which is great for me, not so great for everybody else. But Render API is kind of like moonwalking. In that it's very cool, helps you get dates, and it's a really powerful dance move. But I can never tell whether or not Render API itself, is it propelling Drupal in the right direction? Are we actually going in the right direction? We're just sort of tweaked the wrong way, so we're not actually looking where we're going, or are we facing where we should be going and headed the opposite direction, right? So at San Francisco, I sort of just talked about the complexity of the system and the difficulty in making it work, and the thing is that the reason why we have Render API in Drupal 7 is because we are lazy programmers, which is a virtue, right? We're lazy programmers. We needed a way to add more power to the Drupal 7 theme system. And we had this Form API, which did a bunch of similar things. So why not reuse that code and sort of expand it and make it Render API? And that's how we got Drupal 7, really. But that's because we were being lazy and just reusing code. But we didn't actually have any design goals of what are we trying to do with the system. And I think the end result really shows those lack of design goals. And when I started talking about responsive design, bring this all back, I started to realize what my actual issues were with Render API, which is that there's no design goals. What I sort of imagined is wouldn't it be great if we had like a WYSIWYG editor for this, text area for our basic page, and you got to select design patterns. I need this images and then a description next to it. I need that pattern where it has 3 of those images and text, and then maybe the image and the text are sort of rotating back and forth. And so you select that design pattern, stick it into the spot there, and then fill out the content, right? And it's the design pattern itself is responsive, right? So that as you're going to different different devices, it knows it can respond in the usual way, right? But the thing is that even just that still gets us towards hard-coded HTML. And the thing is that we should be able to get the data out of that design pattern without necessarily forcing all of that HTML down of that design pattern for like mobile apps that just need the data, right? Do we have to throw the entire HTML stuff down at the mobile apps in order just for them to sort of glean this information? Like the DrupalCon app just gets data, right? So how do we get this information? And the DrupalCon apps are great because they're working on fielded nodes, right? There are no basic pages from the DrupalCon site that are in the mobile app, or like maybe just a couple. But those have been sort of added very specifically. So if we could have some way for, well, here we go. How do we make the actual DrupalCon, the content responsive? Yeah, let the theme system convert the semantic content, understand the underlying idea of what is the content that I'm sticking into this basic page, and convert it into rendered markup for whatever I happen to need. If I need it for a website, fine. If I need it for a mobile app, fine. Any kind of device that we need. I know that Greg Dunlap, who's not here right now, or at least he wasn't here, is working on this this problem of Drupal needing to output all these different kinds of content and not just HTML, right? And our content from the basic page should be able to do that too. So maybe, and I'm just throwing out ideas here. I want to have a conversation and have people sort of throw this stuff around. Does HTML5 have enough semanticness inside it that it could be used as a sort of a general container and converter of understanding the semantic nature of our page to be able to convert it into these different formats? Do we need to have microdata, microformats, RDFA, whatever? I don't know. But Drupal needs to understand the semantics of what's inside what is essentially just a giant text field that we ignore right now. JSON is a loose semantic structure. I don't know. This was something that was recently thrown out for the formatting of the we went with XML instead of JSON again, I'm just throwing out ideas right here. Please God, not at XSLT. That's what XLT is basically for, but I just feel like it's never worked very well before. Maybe we can figure out how to make it work again, but anyway, that's my comment. And then, like element info API, like right now in Drupal 7, there's an element info API that talks about different things, right? So you in the render API you specify that like this is a list, right? And there's a whole like API that specifies when you see that this is a list, you render it this way, right? And the thing is that right now the element info API is very hard coded to, it's flexible, but it's hard coded to HTML output, right? And it's not thinking about things in a semantic way at all. It's just like, we've got lists. I don't know what this means. We have an HTML tag element info right now, which is just, I understand the need for it, but it's not semantic at all, right? That's the end of my slideshow, apparently. I have no more slides. So this is what I wanted to get started talking about, and I don't have good answers. I just have a whole bunch of questions. So have I like blown your mind, or are you bored? Anybody?
I'm not sure I quite understand like so if we want to have it responsive and then the connection between tying in, making whatever's outputted something slightly more semantic that can go anywhere or do anything, being responsive. You just see, I just can't make the connection.
Right, okay. So the thing is that if Drupal doesn't understand Oh, yeah, sorry. So the question is, he didn't understand what responsive, it,
Sorry, the first part of the talk and the second part of the talk. The first part of the talk was to do with
right. You didn't understand how responsive tied in with semantic, exactly. And the thing is that responsive design is basically just a layout technique, right? There's nothing in it that inherently about semantics. You're right. But the thing is that if we understand the semantics of our actual content in ways that we don't right now, except, like I said, for fielded nodes, we're in good shape. We can add some sort of thin semantic layer on top of that and be rocking and rolling. Basic page, we don't know anything about it. It's just a big blob that they ignore. And if we understood the semantics of it, we could transform it in responsive ways, not at CSS ways, but at the code level, back-end level, so we can transform it into these different things that we can't do right now. Right now, it's just a big blob of HTML. Yeah.
So, in your nice diagram of the responsive page, it looked like it was mostly the navigation, the blocks, and things and that sort of thing that were moving around. And you really need to get into the basic page to have a responsive.
Right. Let's see if I have. So you basically didn't understand how a content could be responsive, or
I was wondering how necessary it is to be able to be responsive in the main page area. Assuming that the HTML's not.
it actually, how necessary is it to have the actual content be responsive? And basically the more complex the content type is, the more necessary it is for it to be responsive, right? So, and then it's because a lot of times when you have these complex content types, you're already doing like fun things in the Node TPL or whatever, and moving different fields around and stuff into different wrappers, right? So you're starting the process of making nodes sort of responsive, and that's only possible by hard coding the HTML for basic page content types. We can do it with the fielded links, but so it really is. Palantir.net, we were working on a site, our own site, to make it responsive, and it's almost all content that's being made responsive, rather than just like blocks and regions, right? And so designers are absolutely going to need this, and the thing is that I think that we'll need this same idea for outputting to different things besides HTML. So,
What about this against some of the context?
sorry?
What about using context?
Context, yeah, definitely. I mean, Drupal 8, so we're working on adding a context system into Drupal 8. That's absolutely required for this, right? Oh, whoops. Larry.
So, one of the big challenges I see with what I think prescribing is actual usability. Because something you run into just with word processors, where if people think in terms of, I want to make this italics, I want to make this bold, I want to make this left justified, they're done.
Mm-hmm.
That's easy, but totally not portable if they think in terms of style sheets within the word processor itself.
Mm-hmm.
That's more flexible, but another level they can think at. And then if you abstract, like same thing here, if you abstract that further, how difficult do we make content entry in the name of
Yeah,
semantic?
I'm going to repeat the question for the video. So the idea is there's a usability issue with when we're abstracting sort of the WYSIWYG, basically, right? So instead of just like making things bold or italics or shifting off to the left or right, we have to think about semanticness about this. And the thing is that inside these responsive design patterns, you can have semantics embedded in them and say that you need to, or have a configuration maybe so you can say that these are the semantics of the content that you're going to be putting into this design pattern. And yes, there's going to be a usability problem because you're going to make it more complex, but you're also going to make it easier if you have a good enough design pattern library. You're going to make it easier for them to actually create pages because they're not having to do all of it by hand, right? Because like basically when you have like complex HTML that you want to stick into the basic page you turn off the WYSIWYG editor and you start typing your HTML, right? So,
So at that point, how does it differ from a field with a fancy widget on it?
how's it? Only in that I think that we should store the semantic knowledge of the content alongside any HTML that we're adding, right? So that we can understand at the same time, this is the semantics of it, and this is the HTML that's sort of on top maybe. And when you're editing sort of both layers at the same time, right? But it's seamless from the user. They're not editing sort of both layers, but Drupal understands both the semantic understanding and the actual HTML. Or not, actually, it doesn't understand the HTML very much, but it would understand the semantics a lot better in the front there.
I'm just thinking about the next session that's coming up about DITA, the Darwinian information architectural typing, and it also uses semantic information about the content and puts it together and arranges content, and then you can, have a PDF version and a mobile version, all these sorts of things.
What time is that session?
That's coming up in 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. So there's another session right after this. If you're watching the video, watch the one that comes after. I don't know. Find it. What's the name of the session?
Well, it's about data and help and stuff, the next one.
Data and help?
DITA. D-I-T-A.
DITA. Okay. So look for the video on DITA because it has some related information.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I'm just thinking that maybe it could also be used, if we're already going to be using it in Drupal in the documentation, maybe we could also be using it in responsive design.
So yeah, so the suggestion is to use the documentation DITA semantics and sort of leverage that inside the responsive context. Yeah, Lynn.
I actually like to second what Larry says about this, that it might add a bit of complexity in the content editing that might actually leads to not being used so much. Like Semantic Media Wiki kind of allows you to do this stuff,
Mhm.
and I've talked to the people that have developed it, and they say that it's actually, it does provide just enough of a burden that people don't end up adopting it.
Okay.
So it would really require looking at how we're changing the user interface a lot. I think.
Yeah. So Lynn Clark was seconding what Larry said about adding complexity, and there's an actual example of was it Semantic Media Wiki, where they're actually doing something very similar to this, and it adds just enough of a burden that people don't adopt it. And the thing is that WYSIWYGs in general have that same burden, though, right? Because as soon as you want to do anything reasonably complex, you turn off the WYSIWYG and then you write it by hand. So
We do, but not everybody does.
well, yeah, okay, right, oh, yeah.
People then use the hack where they use like H2s for lists, which I have actually seen from computer scientists.
Yeah,
So they might start using hacks for the semantics as well.
Yeah.
Like I want it to be bold, so I'll say that it's this important semantic thing.
right, yeah. Yeah, and it's not an easy problem, but I think, and I don't think we should build like a system of our own. I would definitely, investigate stuff and figure out what problems and avoid the problems, or maybe improve on them, make them better. I don't know. I just want to start the conversation. So, yeah.
So could this dovetail with the kind of stuff that people are trying to do with field information, where they're trying to make it so that it's not as structured? Because, like you were saying, that the field system could have very good semantics. So if they're moving towards, if Drupal's moving towards having unstructured data storage abilities, then couldn't you just be like, oh, I'm adding a field to this node?
Right.
Like we talked about earlier.
They're not talking about removing the fields, though.
No, but I'm saying they're talking about having unstructured data, so that right now there's a barrier that if I want to add a field to a node, I have to add it to every node at that time. But if I'm storing the data in unstructured, then I don't have that requirement.
Basically, you have kind of a schema-less node.
Yeah. So the question was, well, does it tie into this other idea of making fields so that you could maybe just apply some fields to some nodes as an alternative to what we can currently do? Yeah. So the thing is the basic page. It's not that it's we're treating it as unstructured data because we're ignoring it. Basically, it's just this big blob, right? But it actually has structure, right? and I want us to be able to understand its structure. So yeah, it absolutely ties into that, I think. If we could have, like, you know, if we're adding fields into this blob, right, we should be able to track that it is this type of field, right? We don't want to just lose it as rendered HTML, because the insert module I quite like, but that's basically the way it works right now, is you insert an image field into the body type, and as soon as you do that, it's lost. I mean, it's just rendered HTML, and it never knows that it's a field again.
Is that controlled from the theme that you want to deliver? Playing the theme system to control the context. Just trying to think it through. Is there a way of actually applying multiple themes to various bits of code?
Yeah. So there are two things here when you understand the semantics, right? So it allows a lot of different back-end things that are not possible. And then, of course, the theme, the presentation layer, right, has to understand that as well. And the thing is that it's going to get some, from the back end, it's going to get some rendered HTML. Maybe it'll get different HTML depending on what kind of mobile device it is or whatever, but it still has to understand that. But it understands it in the normal way that it's always understood it. It's HTML, I'm adding some CSS, you know, we've got field wrappers right now. This is very similar things right now. Yeah.
The whole idea of responsive, weird thing, the example you're showing is brilliant, but the problem I have, I think the problem is, if you're on a mobile device and you've got an 800 pixel wide image, you're just saying, shows it that way, you're still downloading a massive image. Is there any way of getting in and
Right.
altering that?
I talked about that. So there's a problem with responsive design that I absolutely agree with, is that when you have these flexible columns and the flexible images, what you're actually doing is actually downloading a big image and then rescaling it to be small. This is not particularly performant, to put it nicely.
Rubbish and jaggedy and
Well, right, but some browsers do a much better job at resizing. Surprise, IE, you know, older versions of IE don't, or actually no, wait, it's not even old versions of IE, it's tied to older versions of Windows, do crap jobs of resizing images. So if you're on like Windows XP, I think, your images will look like crap no matter what browser you're using, and that's OS dependent.
You're getting that image on the mobile device. Image style should be passing you.
Right, and we're trying to figure out on the front end with some, you know, contrib modules, how do we do this so we're not hitting this double whammy of downloading an image that's too big and then also causing the mobile device to have to resize it. You know, that's 2 hits against performance. We would like to avoid that, but we're trying to figure that out, and we don't. But that's related, but not really the same thing.
I think that would be, instead of you have a direct link to an image, you'd always pass it through a handle, which is resizing it to whatever size you want. So
Yeah.
that's kind of
Yeah, it's an interesting problem. Actually, we're going to have a BOF that will talk about this, I'm sure, because it's a big issue. At like 3:45, I think, that's going to be talking about responsive design in general.
the main thing for me about responsive design is
I would love to talk for another like hour and a half, but it's 1:30, and I gotta let end this. Thank you very much. I would love to talk more about this. If anybody wants to talk more about, just find me and we'll talk. And yeah, thank you.